What's the most embarrassing truth you had to tell a doctor to get treatment? Story 1. I have schizophrenia. I told the psychiatrist in the psych ward that I felt like I needed to drain all the blood out of my body so I can get back to the right timeline. Truly believed it at the time. Story 2. I had a rash that went down my and up around my but into my tailbone. It was like thong rash and absolutely awful. Everyone assumed it was an STD, then I had to explain I hadn't had in 8 years. Finally my fourth doctor seeing it said herpes doesn't spread up your back. This looks like shingles. Turns out I had a really horrible case of shingles in a very uncommon place. I was hospitalized for something a month later and had to embarrassingly tell a room full of doctors and medical students all about my shingles. Story 3. This was in an ambulance, so not like I was at a doctor's practice, but it was when I attempted suicide when I was younger, and I had to fess up after being asked several times if I had taken anything. When she opened up and said I really do not want you to all of a sudden become unconscious or pass away because you haven't told me, and it really did make me want to be honest, and it was super hard to admit. And honestly I felt ashamed. But I am so glad I did. Edit. Thank you for all the beautiful responses guys, and a big hug to people who are struggling as well. You have certainly brightened my day week month, and I've never gotten such a response online, so I appreciate it. Much love. Story 4. I have been dealing with a lot of anxiety this past year. I have depression and anxiety disorder. Though I'm not taking meds for years now, one night I hyped myself up in a really bad way and just could not calm down, and my anxiety convinced me I was getting a heart attack, and I called an ambulance. It was embarrassing because a tiny, still logical part of my brain knew it was not true, but it felt like I had no control over my own body. 2 super nice EMTs got to my apartment, helped me calm down and listened to me a little. I felt guilty and embarrassed and thought what if maybe someone really needed help and I was holding up an ambulance for a hissy fit, but they calmed me down and told me not to worry about other people, that everybody is taken care of. Sadly, I can't afford therapy, but I managed to apply for 20 free therapy sessions at the local hospital. I started this week actually, so I'm hoping this won't happen in the future. Edit. Thank you so much everyone for your kind words. You have no idea how much they mean. Story 5. I drink a fifth a day and I don't know how to stop. Well, technically I do know, but I'm afraid I'll get withdrawals. I got withdrawals, 152 days sober. Story 6. I was hospitalized this week for 5 days. They had me on a cardiac monitor during my stay. The doc came in on the 3rd morning and told me ID had a spike in my rate at about 10:30 p.m. the night before. Was I asleep or awake? Awake, I told him, hoping there wouldn't be a follow-up question. What was I doing? Do I remember receiving an incredibly spicy goodnight text from my husband? Thankfully the doctor cracked up and was less worried, but that was an awkward start to the day. Story 7. Freshman year of high school. During class, I was bored and around with a soda bottle. Decided to see if I could fit the whole thing in my mouth. I could, triumphantly successful. I removed the bottle and went to close my jaw, and it wouldn't close. I panicked. My mouth was stuck open and a little crooked and I had to yell out to get the attention of my teacher and classmate. I couldn't talk. My mouth was stuck open wide enough to prevent my lips from touching. We went to the office. The nurse had no idea what to do. She called the district nurse who also had no idea. My dad rushed me to the hospital, and while we sat in the waiting room I was managing my spit with paper towels because I couldn't swallow either. The people at the hospital called a dentist. Nobody had any idea how to solve it, so I was sitting there mouth agape for nearly 3 hours. They come in and eventually decide they're going to give me 4 pain meds and then force it back into place. As they're prepping the 4, my jaw miraculously shifts back into place. They sent me home with a Powerade and some ibuprofen. Having to charades my way through explaining that I got myself into the situation by deep-throating a soda bottle was horrific, and I had to do the rigmarole for my teacher, the nurse, my dad, and the hospital. Very hard to live that one down, and I still yawn with my mouth closed a lot of the time these days. Story 8. First day of college. I learned what a migraine was. Unfortunately, it was also my first year going to burn. Let's say I was a little liberal on the drug use. When asked at the nurse's office which drugs I've been on in the last 48 hours, I just opted for saying not heroin, I think. Story 9. I once needed antibiotics for a UTI on my large breed dog. She was extremely aggressive, has since passed. Our house was Fort Knox. Never had any incidents, but I could not bring her to the vet or even let a vet come to my house to do a physical examination. I read online that dog pee is the same as human pee, so I brought her pee sample to my doctor and said it was mine. He low-key accused me of being promiscuous, but I got the antibiotics. Story 10. When I was 19 I ripped the bridge of my foreskin while having some drunken rough one-night stand fun. Ended up getting a circumcision. Explaining to my mom why I needed to see a doctor immediately was more embarrassing than telling my doctor though LMAO. Story 11. I had a relationship with a medical student when I was at university. One afternoon when we were in bed she suddenly got up and grabbed her penlight and disappeared under the covers. A few moments later she diagnosed that I had a hydrocele around one of my love spuds. The diagnosis involves placing a torch against the testicle. The hydrocele is a sac of fluid around the testicle, and because it's fluid light will go through it, so the hole is illuminated. This wasn't particularly embarrassing, but going to the University Medical Center and getting the GP to confirm the diagnosis in order to be referred to get it operated on was embarrassing. Story 12. About 8 years ago I started seeing tiny amounts of blood when I wiped. At first I thought I was just wiping too rough, but it persisted for a couple of weeks. Then one day it hurt when I sat down. A few hours after the onset of the pain, it was unbearable, white-hot throbbing pain near my butthole. And then it popped open, blood and pus all over my underwear. I went to my general practitioner and told him about what happened, which was really embarrassing. He took a quick look and told me I had to go to a rectal surgeon ASAP. I shot over to the surgeon who made me lay down on a table and spread my cheeks. He told me I had a perianal abscess and needed surgery immediately. So the next day I went to the hospital and got surgery. I was told the abscess was bad and it would most likely heal into a fistula, basically a second tube from my rectum to the outside. 3 weeks later I was back at the hospital for second surgery. Because of the fistula I had to have a seton, a surgical thread looped through the fistula and my anus. This was to slowly cut away at the muscle between the fistula and rectum, because if they cut the muscle in one go I would become permanently incontinent. So for the next couple of months I had to go to the surgeon every 2 weeks for him to tighten this string on my anus, slowly cutting the muscle so it could repair itself properly. Hurt like. Eventually the tissue between the fistula became thin enough where a third surgery was possible to fully cut through and have them repair everything. The whole 3 to 4 month process I had to wear feminine pads in my underwear to catch the leaking blood pus, and it became routine to spread my cheeks for this doctor to tighten the cinch around my, and it smelled really bad, was a rough time. The only lasting effect was that I can no longer silently. Story 13. I had a fistula from my bladder into my vaginal canal that was so severe that I didn't actually pee from my urethra for like 2 years. Doctor did not believe me as I was a teenager and they just assumed I didn't know my anatomy. I explained that I could hold a cup and isolate vagina from urethra and pee, didn't believe me. Had an examination and they finally believed me, would up with treatments that worked. It was such a weird shock to finally feel that I was peeing from my urethra again. Story 14. Not me, but anyone remember that story about that guy in Australia who got bit on 2 separate occasions about a year apart by a redback spider on his penis? Can you imagine having to tell the doctor, yeah mate, spider bite on the Todger again? Story 15. I fainted once in college because an I dated tried to wrong-hole me, passed out and peed all over his bed. Lowly learned what a vasovagal response was when I went back home to see my small-town GP and had to explain this to him. Always be truthful with medical professionals, even if it's embarrassing as and they know your family. Story 16. When I gave birth to my son, I pushed when I was told not. The doctor was doing a small incision at the time, so I ended up needing 32 stitches inside and out. After few follow-up appointments, I had to tell the OB that when it now goes forward, bubbling to my vagina. Yep, this happened. Story 17. I had to tell the doctor about seeing, smelling, feeling, hearing or tasting random things that weren't actually there, just lightheartedly, because my husband suggested I ask her about it. Schizophrenia. Story 18. I gave myself a concussion by slipping and hitting my nose on my boyfriend's chin. Urgent care sent me to ER to get some kind of scan to check on my nose. If the paper said life-threatening, I think at least 7 different nurses doctors at the ER gave me the abuse screening questions. They didn't stop until I started listing all my other dumb accidents that mostly happened when my boyfriend wasn't even in the same state, including how I will randomly completely lose my balance while standing still and just fall for no reason. I never got the scan BTW. Story 19. To paint a picture, I was 18, freshman in college, with at the time undiagnosed ADHD, and it's the first time I'm living away from my parents and making my own DRS appointments. I was experiencing some abdominal pain and discomfort. I had recently finished my cycle, and I realized I had no memory of removing my last tampon. I convince myself that I'm experiencing TSS and become worried I may die. I was freshly 18 y'all. I quickly make an appointment with student health, explain all of this to the NP. They do an exam. I just had a mild yeast infection. I did not forget a tampon in myself. I actually wasn't experiencing any symptoms associated with TSS. I was fine. Story 20. I had to admit to a physical therapist that the reason my lower back had seized up anew, making it so I couldn't even bend to tie my shoes, was that my husband and I had tried a new position. We have not tried it since. Story 21. I was heavily pregnant and decided to do the birth shave. I had really bad hemorrhoids at the time and nipped my, causing the hemorrhoid to bleed profusely, so I had to embarrassingly explain I am bleeding from my as I was trying to shave it. Never gone near a razor again. Story 22. I went for a super itchy rash. My lovely GP said, "This looks like scabies." Turns out my severely alcoholic ex had banged a homeless girl in my bed while watching our child. No, I didn't know how bad he had gotten, and he didn't watch our child again until he was sober, almost a year and a half later. He went untreated for scabies for a year and a half. That's how horrible and disgusting alcoholism is. Very blessed that he did get sober and is now a great father. Story 23. Early 80s. Monday of the last week of school was senior skip day. Every senior skipped school, except the ones as too many unexcused absences 10. I had 9 days so I skipped. I was brought into the school office Wednesday and told I wouldn't graduate because of too many absences 11. Turns out I had been late and was absent 2 classes. 2 classes 11 days, absent 6 classes 10 days. Because of the 2 classes at 11 days I would have to repeat before I could get my diploma. The question. I went to my doctor, without an appointment, waited in line, pre-seen by the PA wouldn't answer her questions. I just need to see my doctor. Doctor comes in and I explain it all. Senior skip school day, too many absences and I need a doctor's note to excuse the tardy day. He just stared at me a second, smiled, snickers and called the Paget lovely nuts a doctor's note for X day saying he was in my care that day. told me next time he saw me it had better be serious. I hope his retirement serves him well. Story 24. I went to see my doctor for a severe stomach bug, probably norovirus. Couldn't figure out how I got it since no one else in my group at the bachelorette party got sick that weekend. And then it occurred to me, and I had to share with my doctor at the casino, we'd encountered a rugby team, and one of the players and I got drunk and snuck off and I gave him the way my face fell when I realized, I could see she was trying not to react. I needed a hysterectomy and I told 3 doctors that I wanted to cut it out myself and I would if no one helped me. I showed up to the hospital with an actual surgeon's blade and put it up to my abdomen and almost cut myself open. I was tackled by a security guard and spent 3 days in the PYSCH ward. I told the doc about my issues and she ordered a bunch of tests. 1 month later I had my hysterectomy. I had uterine cancer and it was diagnosed while I was in the mental ward. Story 25. Back when I was a child I sucked the air out of a glass bottle and got stuck. Somehow I managed to free myself but my lip looked like I was happy on Botox. I was very embarrassed and said to my grandparents I got stung by a bee or something and we went to the doctor where the truth came out. Story 26. I called the doctor's office and they couldn't get me in and I had to tell the receptionist I've had diarrhea for 6 days, so they said they'd try to get me in after all. Story 27. I'm a married guy and my new doctor as part of the new patient physical asked, how many partners have you had in the last 12 months? She was an older woman, and my wife and I have an open relationship, and that year had been rather active. It is not something that we hide, but this new doctor gave off school marm vibes, and it suddenly made me embarrassed to tell her how many people I had been with recently. I said it quietly, and she asked me to speak up. When I did she raised an eyebrow and matter-of-factly said, okay, we'll be doing an STD panel on every checkup. I just quietly nodded my head like I had been given extra homework. Story 28. That the reason I was visiting was to get a 2-inch long wooden splinter cut out of just a few short inches from my most secret orifice. And that it was so red and swollen because I had spent much of the previous hour bent over a table, while my mother and a couple other elder women family friends were spelunking in my crack trying to get it out. We didn't know quite how long it was until it was removed. Story 29. That the daily vomiting I was experiencing turned out to be from self-induced stress, not an illness. After I figured it out, I had to tell the doctor it was all in my head and anti-nausea meds weren't going to help it stop. Extremely embarrassing. Story 30. Told my drive I was repeatedly passing out when using the bathroom. Turns out I have endometriosis, had to fight for her to do surgery to prove it, and she removed a ton of extra tissue and it's been so much better. Story 31. Freshman away at college, early 80s, naive, discovering relationships and more about myself. I panicked because I had apparently caught venereal warts on my penis. A single wart anyway, no real photos of them available to me back then to check, no internet. So I ran to the school clinic, met with an older doctor, had to unzip and put it in his gloved hand as he sat on a rolling stool at eye level with it. He said, you don't have warts, that's a scar from catching it in your zipper. I was apparently spectating a little too much. Then he proceeded to show me a medical book with photos. Yikes, finished the appointment by handing me a condom. I learned my lesson that day, but I did eventually have to come back for crab shampoo, haha. Story 32. I'm autistic with ADHD, but for the first 30 years of my life I had no idea. I was diagnosed with OCD, PTSD, severe anxiety, and treatment-resistant major depressive disorder. I tried 13 different psychiatric meds and 6 therapy modalities over nearly 20 years of treatment but still wasn't a functional human being in any regard. At 33 years old I had to tell a brand new family physician I'd never met that I was regularly going a week or more without showering and skipping meals regularly because I just couldn't make myself get up and do anything. Despite every bit of effort I could squeeze from my useless husk of a brain, I could not take care of the most basic of my needs. I felt utterly disgusting and so ashamed of myself that I had to look at the ground while I admitted it. I couldn't look anywhere near the doctor's face even as he was comforting me, thanking me for my honesty, and explaining that this sort of thing is actually extremely common in people with mental illnesses and those who are neurodivergent and don't have access to proper supports. Anyway, it turns out growing up multiply disabled but not knowing and instead holding yourself to standards you couldn't possibly meet even on your best days doesn't do great stuff for one's mental health. I'm doing better these days now that I'm properly diagnosed and medicated, thank goodness, but I've learned that hygiene issues in particular are much more common than most of us know or acknowledge. Story 33. Blood in stool. For a while, one doctor was like, well, some people have noses, some people have. I was floored by how unprofessional his response was. After gathering the courage to tell him this and to make the appointment and tell the person making the appointment, I had to do it all over again with a different doctor, who said I had a severe case of hemorrhoids. Story 34. My 4-year-old, now 6, got a UTI and a skin infection because he stuffed his foreskin with Play-Doh. I had to explain how this happened to deflect suspicion of neglect or abuse, and was treated to a long lecture about how to care for intact boys. I myself was cut as an infant so this doesn't happen again. Story 35. Walked in with a 14-inch combat knife and told my DR if I didn't get help I'd stick it in my own neck. I have untreated UPT and desperately need therapy. Story 36. I went to the hospital with appendicitis. During the exam, I don't remember why but they asked me to move to another room, so I did darn those backless hospital gowns and I was trying to hold the gown shut. The doctor asked me if I was active. I was 18. I got all offended and asked him why that was any of his business. He said it wasn't except if I noticed the pain more during, and it was just funny seeing 2 hickeys on my, but, yeah, I had to say yep, those are hickeys, and yes, I did decide to go to the hospital because I thought I was going to die during. He said good, that verifies it was my appendix. Story 37. I'm kinda slutty, but irresponsible, so I went to our city's public health department for STI testing. While asking me some health questions, one was how many partners have you had recently? I asked, what time frame do you mean? She said, let's say 6 months. My eyes got huge and she could see steam coming out my ears as I tried to estimate. She said, well, just leave that one blank. My silence was quite embarrassing. I always wonder if she would have guessed more or less than the 30-ish guys that it was. Story 38. It's not as embarrassing as some of these, but I pulled my hamstring and had to admit that I was doing the kid end play at my birthday party and jumped into the splits, at age 38. Story 39. I called Planned Parenthood at 20 and told the gal on the phone, my bleeding and it ain't my period. She tried her best to hold her laughter, also cause of my voice. She insisted my parent be there ill. Story 40. When I was at summer camp I got this awful stomach ache after licking a girl's foot on a dare. Turns out she had just cleaned the bathroom floor right before, so I ingested cleaning solution. I went to the camp nurse who told me I was an idiot and to only come back if it got worse. Story 41. Problems due to IBS, needed surgery. Not fun. I had no idea that I had a tampon inside of me for 10 days, and I had to tell the doctor I was there because it smelled like there was a dead animal trapped in my vagina. Story 42. Attempted suicide and was hospitalized. My case was presented in a room with lots of doctors, medical students and whatnot. One of the professors asked me if I binge eat. It was so embarrassing to admit that. Story 43. I had gotten bit by a spider on my breast in my sleep. The spot was the size of a quarter by the time I got in to see her. Needless to say, she had a good laugh about that one, and she prescribed me about 800 milligrams of anti-venom medication. Not ideal. Story 44. In Canada we don't do preventative checks anymore. For example, as a man you're supposed to get prostate and colon exams starting in your 30s, but we don't have the resources to do that. I made up bleeding so I could get a colonoscopy at 35. Story 45. Pretty sure I have aged mid-30s. I think I've had it my whole life, but it was getting worse and I was falling behind at work and deadlines, and I would literally sit and stare at my work for hours because I could force myself to sit there, but I just couldn't do the work. It was torture, and everything else was piling up. Stressed out of my mind about everything, I kind of broke down in the doctor's office admitting I just wasn't able to function on some level. Anyway, apparently ADHD meds don't mix well with blood pressure meds, so she wouldn't prescribe me anything. She gave me a referral for a psychologist. So that was like 6 months ago. I'll let you know when I have time to follow up on that, lol. Story 46. I had internal hemorrhoids but didn't know. I was literally on fire and it hurt to walk, sit, pee, everything. I finally went to the hospital because I had convinced myself something serious was wrong. The doctor came in, shoved his finger up my, wiggled it around, and said I have hemorrhoids. I got a prescription for hemorrhoid ointment. Story 47. Hi, I wish to unalive myself. It was not the discussion I wanted to have in a hospital. It was 2020 and everyone was masked up and the intake nurse couldn't hear me as maybe I was mumbling as I was that nervous. But that was a truth that was not great. I'm doing pretty alright now. Story 48. Thrombosed hemorrhoid. Had to explain to 3 different doctors that I had a grape tomato-sized hemorrhoid that needed to be drained before one kind soul even agreed to look at it and determine, yup, that needs drained. Story 49. It's worse than you think. I was in so much pain I walked from the opposite side of my math room to the door, all while my teacher yelled at me. He kept asking me questions which I wasn't answering after my first question. Something seriously wrong. Can I please go see the nurse? He told me I better not walk out that door or he would break my nose. I gave him the finger and took 10 seconds to close the door. I cocked my mom, who's a nurse, and told her I'm pretty sure I have ball cancer, and she laughed her off. 2 hours later, a smoking hot nurse that's only a few years older told me she's gonna manipulate your testes. You want mom to stay, mom? Please leave. Testicular torsion. Story 50. Oh no, this is horrific. I can't believe I'm putting this out on the internet. Deep breath, maybe it will help awareness of how horrible food intolerances etc. can be. So it was the night I knew I couldn't eat gluten anymore. I had the worst tummy pains, nausea and diarrhea. At one stage, I wasn't sure what end to deal with first. I was in so much pain I fainted, sat on the toilet, fell off the toilet, smacked my head on the side of the bath and ended up in a heap on the floor, at which point Hubs came into the bathroom to try to help me. Bless him, it can't have been pretty. So throughout the night and following day, I continued to be poorly because my body just will not stop trying to get rid of gluten, to the point I actually can't go to the toilet anymore, but my body still wanted to, at which point I'm now losing blood. So this was pretty much what I told my GP when I saw her because we were getting concerned how poorly I was getting. So the embarrassing bit, she donned a pair of gloves and stuck a finger up my bum to try to make sure I hadn't done any serious damage. I was too late for the celiac blood test. You've got to be consuming gluten normally for around 6 to 8 weeks for an accurate result, so she just said, stay away from gluten at all costs. Haven't touched it since. Story 51. Asking for estrogen cream to soothe and help out my atrophied vagina. He was a young doctor and legit had to look up with me in the room why women needed etc. Too many awkward questions. Story 52. As a doc, I've heard many of these things more than once. I promise it's okay, we aren't going to judge you, and we've almost certainly heard it before, and if we haven't, we will probably tell you we did. The PSA is that if you're using illicit drugs or prescriptions that aren't yours or something, please tell medical staff about them. We are not cops, we are not narcs, we want to treat you, and if, for example, you do a bunch of cocaine and don't tell us, we could give you something that interacts fatally. Please, please, please. Story 53. I had to tell them my father got me pregnant for them to let me use my fake ID and get an abortion. I'm forever grateful they listened and turned a blind eye. Story 54. That due to my hydrophobia, I struggle to wash more than once a week. TBF. I know it's disgusting to hear about, but I compensate as best I can by wearing a linen base layer, regularly changing said base layer, and using dry wipes and fabric to keep clean. I know it's not enough to be socially accepted, but I'm trying my best here. Story 55. I suffered from itchy junk butthole sore of the back of my assembly and thought it was something I was doing wrong, and I was so embarrassed I put up with it for years, tried pinworm medication at one point, tried yeast infection stuff. Nothing I did on my own worked, so I had to go to the doctor and tell them I had chronic itchy butthole. Turns out I have something called lichen sclerosis that is treatable with steroid cream. Looking back, it's nothing to be embarrassed about. Doctors look at buttholes and weird stuff all the time, but I really had to work up the chutzpah to bring it up to a medical professional and suffered unduly for a long time. I don't relish in talking about my lichen, but if one person is helped by me sharing my woes, it'll be worth it. Story 56. I had a really uncommon hip dysplasia from birth, but I didn't know wasn't diagnosed until my 20s. It's taken about 9 years and 4 major surgeries to undo 25 years of neglect and misdiagnosis. That's not the embarrassing part. Now in my 30s, I recently had to explain to a new GP that no, this severely neglected carpal tunnel is not from an office job. It's from using masturbation as a natural pain reliever for the 15 or so years prior to me being properly treated for what was ever-advancing arthritis of the hips. And for a moment there I just thought I was the rare, compulsive female pervert. Story 57. Had a piece of sore skin in an awkward private area. Every time I'd go to the bathroom, I'd be white-knuckling it. I was in for cancer treatment, and they say everything can be sensitive, so I wasn't surprised, but I was worried it wasn't going away, and I knew I'd have to tell someone. The thing is, if I mentioned it, they'd want to have a look. I remember sitting on the bed as the nurse did my intake form, and I spat it out before my mind could stop me. Sure enough, she had to have a look, and it was done in 2 seconds. Bit of sore skin in the worst place. A few medicated wipes and a bit of paraffin to stop irritation rubbing, and I was sorted. Story 58. Not exactly the prompt, but I know several doctors who have told me that it's not uncommon for people, often older men, to come in saying they slipped and fell onto phallic objects. A shampoo bottle, eh? And they stand by their story that they weren't just trying but stuff for fun, they just happened to fall completely naked onto their wives, and it went right up with no chance of coming back out. Story 59. The first time I got COVID, it made me get ulcers in my vagina. I actually got my first vaccine dose at the CDC campus for research efforts. They asked me if I ever had COVID before and what my symptoms were. I got ulcers, where, in my vagina, immediately types it into database. Story 60. I used to work logistics at Target one day, in about 2012 or 2013. I don't remember which exactly. I was backstocking toys in the back room when I bent down to pick up a case to backstock in the case stock shelves. As I started to stand back up with a box, I felt a very sharp pinch in the lower part of my spine. Debilitating pain for a few seconds. My TM saw the whole thing and even filled out an incident report and sent me to the doctor to get checked out just in case. By the time I got to the DR, I was fine, but they ran some tests and felt around anyways and put me on a week of light duty just in case I aggravate something. Now the embarrassing part, what was in the box that started all of this? Some piece of furniture, dumbbells, nope, it was a case that was full of Barbies. Not even like Barbie playsets or anything, just the actual dolls. I have never felt more emasculated in my life. Story 61. Not exactly said, but did I have horrific periods, I pass out, throw up, etc. Also have passed quite large clumps of tissue. My GP was constantly waving me off. I was getting suicidal at the point. This one time, I passed a clump about the size of my thumb. Thought yeah this, wrapped it in tissue and then in a bag. Brought it to the doctor, complained, and warned her what it was. She saw it and was like, oh my god. Finally started ordering a fuckload of tests, couldn't find anything at the time. Over time it's been agreed I have endo. But God, I knew it wasn't normal to be passing out and throwing up from pain. There's multiple women in my family with periods. Even they were like WTF and arguing on my behalf. Most frustrating time in my life. Another time I had to say to the doctor about after, when the protein was coming out of me, I also passed a huge tumor-looking squishy bouncy ball looking. They thought maybe it's miscarriage, take a pregnancy test. It was not, cue a bunch more tests just again to find nothing. Even if I wasn't a trans man, this period would make me want to KMS. Story 62. As a doctor reading these, I must say that there's none of this I haven't heard before. I don't mean to downplay the feelings experienced by everyone in these moments, but rather want to say that you should never be ashamed to tell us what's going on. Lots of time is wasted when people tell roundabout vague stories or straight-up lies to avoid sharing something embarrassing. Like, I don't care if you do drugs. I'm not here to penalize you or get you in trouble. I just need to know for your safety. Did you put something in your but that's now stuck? Okay, well we can deal with this quicker if you just tell me that rather than beating around the bush and saying your stomach hurts. And if a doctor has laughed or made you feel ashamed for sharing something like this, then that's a problem with their professionalism. Story 63 ran into a door face first, had a heavy nosebleed, did not just have to explain that I am an absolute idiot, but also had confirmed like 20 times that my boyfriend did indeed not hit me. Story 64 I had to tell a doctor at the state health department that postpartum psychosis runs in the family, and if they refused me a copper IUD and I got pregnant and killed the baby's blood would be on their hands. This was after she denied me the BCBC. I had never had kids before at 19 or might want them in the future. Once she heard blood on her hands, the pen hit the paper so quickly. Story 65 being too rough with a toy causing permanent hemorrhoids. Doctor's response was that she did her residency in Vegas and had already seen everything, made me feel better. Story 66 I received my POTS diagnosis by explaining to a cardiologist that I had been sexy choked to the point of losing consciousness and it felt no different than the woozy lady episodes I experienced daily. Woke up during apologizing BC, I thought ID just had a little woozy lady moment. Doc immediately knew what was going on and was very happy with my ability to explain the issue. Story 67 I had my septum ring knocked down my throat while having some SNU and it got stuck. I couldn't breathe. Yeah, I had to repeat that story a couple times. My ex was proud, I was not. Story 68 Well, I had a real bad fall bombing a hill on my skateboard, bruising all over my body, more every day. About 5 days later my turn purple. I figured I was fine, but I mean purple merits a trip to the clinic, right? She said I was fine, normal bruising, but didn't even look at my. I mention it and she's like, do you want me to look at it? Just like, absolutely not, but shouldn't you?